From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 2 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
This is The Network, a living, breathing intelligence that's helping drive the future of business. In here, inventory can be taught to learn. Machines have a voice. Medical history follows you. It's the AT&T network, a network of possibilities, committed to delivering the most advanced mobile broadband experience to help move business forward.
Geico, committed to providing service to its auto insurance customers for over 70 years. More information on auto insurance at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO, any time of the day or night.
Smart global investing requires expertise from the ground up. With insights from local experts across the world, we have a unique perspective on global investing. Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.
Issue 1, too big to fail.
I urge Democrats and Republicans in the Senate to find common ground on a plan they can get support from both parties in the House, a plan that I can sign by Tuesday.
Okay, the economic stats. In the second quarter of this year, April, May, June, the U.S. economy grew at a rate of 1.3%, very far below the expectation. Yet even more serious is the downward revision of our first quarter, the recovery. January, February, March, from 1.9% to 0.4%. That's 0.4% growth. Question: are these statistics a bigger worry than the debt ceiling prevailing argument? Pat Buchanan.
They're equally big worries, John, despite the fact that the president had an $800 billion stimulus. The Fed has tripled the money supply. We've had 3 deficits of almost $5 trillion. The economy is completely dead in the water. That argues for a stimulus of a Reaganite stimulus or an Obama stimulus, but there's no more tools in the toolbox here. On the other side, you got the debt deficit problem, which of $10 trillion in deficits come, which argues for austerity, spending cuts, tax hikes. So you got the two are in total conflict. The president's inherited an economy, John, that I think the only way this thing's going to go forward is through the old stagflation of the post-Nixon era.
Eleanor.
Well, they've got to raise the debt ceiling, even if it takes the president invoking the 14th Amendment to the Constitution and doing it under his own authority. They've got to do that because the consequences of that, the numbers you just put up on the screen, would look rosy compared to what this economy would look like if we default. We take the whole world, global economy with us.
Who believes we're going to do that?
I do. I know Michelle Bachmann doesn't. Maybe you're in her camp. But I think defaulting on our debt would cause interest rates to go up. Say bye-bye to your 401k. It would have all kinds of negative implications. But the sluggish economy, I think, is in part because Washington doesn't work, and businesses are retracting, consumers are overly cautious, everybody is treading water, waiting to see what's going to happen. And Pat's right, there are not a lot of tools in the toolbox left anymore.
What do you think of this debt crisis?
Well, I think it's a very serious crisis because, in a sense, it's perhaps a longer-term problem than is the short-term problem of the uneconomic.
Is it on artificial respiration? Are they keeping it alive deliberately to keep something else away from? For example, these stats, the stats that I just put on the board, are buried, and everyone's talking about the crisis with the debt ceiling.
Well, it is.
But is that a calculated distraction to keep something else off the front page? You follow me?
Let me put it this way. I don't think it makes sense for somebody to shoot off his foot and then say his leg's hurting him. That's what that would be the equivalent of.
But who believes that's going to carry? The deal is right there on the table. All they have to do is take it. Somebody is holding out. Right, but are they holding out on principle, or are they holding out because of political calculation? Well, maybe for next year.
It's both. It's both.
There's an election coming up. Does it help Obama to be so tenacious to his point of view?
Why do you think Obama wants to make sure that we don't have to look at this again next year? Because he knows it's going to make his economy.
No, the argument is he's keeping these stats off page 1 by everyone being diverted to this. Do you understand?
Yes, but every issue like this,
he could calculate a way out of the debt crisis.
page
exploded
of the
into
whole
the
thing.
headline.
Right,
Everything is
exactly.
on page 1 at this stage of the game. Let me tell you why the stats are so critical. Because almost 20% of the American working force is really unemployed.
That's the
and
story.
They know it.
That's the story.
That
But
is
that's
a story.
not the story
It
that's
has
hitting
been
page
highlighted
one.
tomorrow.
It'll be the headline.
I
on
wonder.
Tuesday.
I
It'll be
wonder.
huge.
It's
I
not gonna
wonder.
go. It's not
It's
going
huge.
away.
But this other thing is going to be kept alive artificially to keep these
They're
stats
both
submerged.
gigantic stories,
is that
John.
Well, whether you
Media
submerge the
conspiracy?
stats or not, the public can feel it, and
That's
that's
right.
what counts politically. They can feel
But
like
when they
more of
read
like that
it, when they read it,
20%.
that's 0.4%.
It's not being buried, John. The fact is the debt ceiling is important. And you know why? Because the business community, prosperous folks out there, like my good friend Mort over here, they want some stability. They want some predictability out there. And right now, all we got is question marks all over the place here as to whether or not that 40% of our budget.
You're gonna
And
downgrade
clearly,
the
in
credit
this
rating
country,
of
we
the
have a
United States.
we
You're
have a
gonna downgrade the
dysfunctional
credit rating of the
government.
United
We have a
States.
dysfunctional government that's going to have to address a lot
John, that
of
is
critical
simply
issues.
dysfunctional.
You mean the illusion of dysfunctionality?
Well, I don't know that it's an illusion.
in fact,
John.
they're hammering it out. But anyway, it's an artificial deal to start with. It's an artificial argument.
It's
John,
not,
do you
that's
have-
not
It's a
an artificial
diversion.
issue.
John, you have tea in that cup? Have you joined the Tea Party? That is their position, you know.
No. I'm not associating
Hey, John,
myself
the
with the Tea
downgrade-
Party at all.
Well,
I'm
the
just
downgrade-
saying that this is a clever way of submerging these awful
But
stats that
they're
I
not-
just put on
John,
the
the
board.
downgrade of the debt
Okay,
is
what's
coming.
the biggest problem?
I think the biggest problem the country has right now is not the budget deficit. Biggest problem the country has right now is the jobs deficit.
Unemployment is the biggest problem the U.S. faces today, so says former Obama economist Larry Summers. The unemployment rate now stands at 9.2%. 14 million Americans are out of work. 6 of the 14 million have been out of work for at least 7 months. These figures account for why a majority of Americans, 52%, believe that the president is not doing enough to create jobs.
Question, how many jobs are needed to be created to restore full employment by the end of this decade? 2020. I ask you, Pat.
10 to 15 million, because we got a labor force that is growing. At the same time, you've got something like 24 million people who are unemployed or underemployed. Half of those have got to get back to work. So I would say close to 20 million jobs are going to have to be created, John, in the next 10 years.
You think this
Well,
is
20 million jobs is what Clinton created in his
Reagan.
8 years. And George W. Bush had actually negative job growth. And when this president took office, we were still losing jobs, I think at the rate of 800,000 a month for those first several months. This job growth is extremely weak. It's nobody is happy about it. But the awful truth is there isn't a whole lot that this government can do about it. Maybe you have some secret ideas,
No,
but
they're not secrets. And frankly, there are a number of things that could have been done. Frankly, they should have been done
Well,
at the beginning of the
how about now?
downturn.
Like what?
And
Like what?
Like an infrastructure bank, and get
Well.
huge infrastructure programs underway. Those are job multipliers, not just job savers. Too much of the money was diverted by the Congress to the cities and towns, which basically helped the public service unions. These did not
Well,
save jobs,
but
okay?
the president
They did not
is
create.
pressing.
Let me just finish my thought here. You have a real crisis on our hand. We all do, okay? There is a huge unemployment number. The jobs here are breaking up this economy and breaking up families in a way that we have not seen in our lifetimes. I mean, maybe you, coming from another century, may have seen it.
But John-
I did not.
So this is the most important story.
Absolutely. The
The
jobs are the
president-
most critical issue facing this country
you're
today.
talking
Larry
about-
Summers is absolutely right on that.
You're talking about, though, and I don't disagree, you're talking about a gigantic stimulus package. We just had $800 billion, and everybody else is talking about cutting $3 trillion out of the
the
budget.
president is pressing for that infrastructure bank. He's also pressing for trade deals, and they are all being blocked by a Republican minority that is obsessed with cutting spending. It is completely
He did not ask for it.
misplaced
He
priorities.
did not ask for it when he needed it a couple of years ago. And
He
today,
got
what you get
he could
to
get.
deal with Pat's
he got what
problem.
he could get out of the political system.
We can
It
argue
wasn't
that.
enough.
But what you have now, you have to have short-term stimulus and long-term deficit cuts. So if you
I
get
agree.
that balance, that program balance, you can get through this crisis.
All
But
right,
not
let
the
me-
way we're doing it.
let me
We'll have
get
to
this
elect
in here,
Mort-
Ellen,
Mort-
excuse me.
Wait, Mort for speaker. If you could bring that
Yeah,
off,
thank
you've
you.
got my vote.
Harper's Magazine,
willing to
Clarence, this is
consider it.
directed at
Good.
you. It says being unemployed. This is Harper's Magazine.
Right.
Being unemployed raises a woman's risk of early death by 37% and a man's risk by 78%. Is long-term unemployment a health crisis?
Unemployment is unhealthy for children, adults, and other living things. The
Shortens
fact of the
your
matter is,
lifespan.
The fact of the matter is, our whole economy, our whole quality of life is dependent upon the economy. And this is what makes it such a salient political issue that tends to override all others, because the ability of people to either have or maintain the American dream is wrapped up in this, not to mention basic survival.
It doubles the odds of a premature death.
Right.
What do you think of that?
Well, you know, look around.
So if anybody thinks the unemployment thing is just a figure.
I hope nobody thinks that.
Well, think of the radiational effect that has on the population.
Only people I can think of
It's such
who
a
might
downer.
benefit, yeah.
It's such a downer.
The only people who
and
benefit
it's going to be, and it could be what ruins his efforts to be reelected.
Is that what the argument is, John? I mean, everybody agrees unemployment's bad. The argument is over what to do about it.
The question is whether or not it's going to
gridlock.
crowd him out of a second term.
Well, not just him.
Exit question. What's the impact of this economic trend on President Obama's re-election in 2012? I gave you the answer. 15 months from now, Pat.
I think currently it is disastrous on the president because he's got this debt crisis, and now this looks like he's going to have a terrible economy going into an election year, and usually that means you don't get reelected.
Well, short term, the president's winning the politics because comparatively he looks better than the crowd on Capitol Hill. But he's vulnerable. Any president who's got unemployment rate over 7% is vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the unemployment rate is much worse. The American public knows it. Every family is affected. Everybody knows somebody who is affected by it. I think that is the biggest issue facing this country in economic terms and in political terms. Nobody could win an election with an unemployment rate that is really at about 18%, not 9%.
You see that revision January, February, and March of this year?
Yeah.
Just put out?
Yeah.
What is it, 0.4%?
Yes, that's for one of the months, but for the quarter, down from 1.9%. But that tells you we've created virtually no net jobs. When you have an economy that's growing that slowly.
Why is there such a gulf between those two statistics?
The way they work,
3 and 4.4. There's no gulf. It's the economy's flat in the water.
No, the original statistics was 1.7.
Those statistics
it's been dropped to 0.4.
I know.
0.4%. That's a big drop.
Yeah,
why that big cleavage?
That's a very good question, John. That's an enormous change.
Do we have any problem with the Bureau of Labor Statistics or with the Commerce Department?
I actually think the Bureau of Labor Statistics tends to try and make the job numbers look as good as possible when they come out. When they have to do
when they're bad, they try to make them look
as good as possible. When they do the revisions, they find out a lot of the assumptions they made simply were inaccurate. For example, they estimate how many jobs are created by companies that started. They estimate a certain number of startups, as they call them. Then they find out, guess what, folks? They didn't have that number of startups. It's a statistical effort to make this. And they've overstated those jobs.
Who's controlling their effort to do that? Is that just the instinct of federal workers?
They're not political appointees.
They are political.
They're bureaucrats, they're professionals, and they're doing the best they can.
Right.
This is no more a conspiracy than the media conspiracy that you seem to see.
Well, you know, this is politics, and it's not helpful for his reelection. So a call comes from the White House. Can't you use a little different language to describe this? Can't you modify your term?
If you find that call from the White House, you've got a front-page story.
What do you think?
Or a best-selling thriller coming up here, because let's deal with
come on, let's
deal with reality.
Scene.
Let's deal with reality here, though. What counts is not the numbers right now, but the numbers next year going into the election, especially that last 3-4 months. He's got to get some inertia built up, which we don't have now. Every election is about either change or more of the same. He won on change. He's got to run now like FDR in 1936, saying that, happy days aren't here again, but we're on the right path.
Issue 2, the wealth chasm.
America is free and America is brave, but America is far from equal. The Pew Research Center released a study this week that says that the wealth divide between white Americans and black Americans is very big and has widened to the largest gap in 25 years. Here's the breakout. Item. Net wealth, white Americans, $113,000, black Americans, $5,700. Ratio, 20-1. Item. Net wealth lost during the ongoing recession. White Americans, 16% lost. Black Americans, 53% of wealth lost. That news came on top of the current unemployment numbers. The national unemployment rate for white Americans is 8.1%. For black Americans, 16.2%. President Obama, the nation's first black president, is doing nothing about this, some believe. One of these so-believers is Princeton professor Cornel West.
That I think he does have a predilection much more toward upper middle class white brothers and Jewish brothers, and has a certain distance from free black men who will tell him the truth both about himself as well as what's going on in black communities, brown communities, red communities, and poor white and working class communities.
West calls President Obama, quote, a black mascot of Wall Street oligarchs and a black puppet of corporate plutocrats, unquote. Also, Professor West announced this week that he and talk show host Tavis Smiley will begin a national poverty tour next month to sharpen the nation's awareness on what they call the failings of the president. African Americans at large agree with West and Smiley. The president has dropped by more than 20 points with African Americans, from 77% last year to just over 50% this year. Why? Jobs. By the way, in 2008, the black vote for President Obama was history-making. 96% of blacks voted in favor of the Obama-Biden ticket over the McCain-Palin ticket.
Question: what explains the disparity between net wealth for whites and net wealth for blacks? Clarence Page.
Well, first let's distinguish between wealth and income so people aren't confused, because wealth includes income, property you own, your entire estate. The biggest factor is real estate. We're talking about the last 25 years, from the mid-'80s when we saw the real fruits of the '60s with the doubling of the growth of the black middle class. We just began to acquire some wealth, houses and other properties in an appreciable sense. Then the '90s and the last decade of the housing bubble. And also about a third of the market over the last decade or so with these subprime loans. A lot of black folks took a harder hit on that than white folks did. So that was why you saw this widening of the gap here in recent years. What can Obama do about it? I think, knowing Cornel West, he'd like to see some direct payments of some kind. That ain't going to happen. Fact of the matter is, Obama politically is on the right course, which is a colorblind approach aimed at helping people based on income and opportunity, to try to help people across racial lines, knowing that a disproportionate amount of need is in the black community, so the black community will be helped. But that's a great debate going on.
Amen. The Hispanic community lost 66% of its wealth, and the reason, John, is the subprime mortgages wiped these folks out of their prime asset, which was houses. It went down. Take a look at the states where the subprime disaster hit: California, Nevada, Arizona, and Florida. Hispanic community extremely heavy, and then you go around the cities, and Clarence's point about homes is important, but the white community itself lost $20,000 per family, John, and I know that's a smaller amount, but everybody's being hammered, and I think Clarence is right when he said, you ought to try to do policies for evereveryone.
You said Clarence is right more times on this show than we can recall.
Let me retract one of them.
Here's something for your column, Clarence. National Urban League Policy Institute. National Urban League Policy Institute. Respectable institute.
Very much so.
The black middle class has been set back 30 years by this economic crisis today.
In terms of household wealth, that's arguable, yeah.
How do you recover from that?
Well, we recovered from worse, actually. I'm optimistic, and so are black folks. I should point out, Ellis Cose's new book, The End of Anger, talks about how, for the first time, and Pew backs this up, black folks are more optimistic about the long-term future in America than white folks.
Who wrote the
book?
book?
That's happened. Ellis Cose, who wrote a book 20 years ago about the anger in the black middle class. But we're talking long-term. Short-term, we're all in trouble.
Let me just say one thing. The housing crisis is not limited to any particular community. During the Great Depression, housing prices from peak to trough went down by 31%. So far this time, housing prices have gone down by 33%, and they're still going down. We're not through that crisis. It's a huge crisis that affects everybody because, as you say, it is the largest asset. The home equity is the largest asset on the balance sheet of the average American family, and it's being wiped out.
Well, the implications of this politically, Karl Rove has written a piece saying that 100,000 fewer votes from African Americans in North Carolina could wipe away the gains that the president needs. And Hispanics, in that same Pew survey, they are the hardest hit group by the recession, and that comes at the same time they have the growing clout as a political force. So will they be more politically engaged next year? And again, the Democrats really need them, and they're everywhere. They're not just in a handful of states.
The statistics that we put up on the board on the disparate wealth of blacks and whites are so worrisome that Barack Obama ought to put out a policy for Black America, a policy agenda for Black America.
John,
would that be a bad move, a good move, or a risky move, or both?
Terrible move for this reason. The white working class has been hammered completely. As Clarence said, their aspirations and their hopes for the future are going down. They're the most alienated of any group of Americans right now. They're behind the whole Tea Party movement. If you do something, for heaven's sakes, do it for all Americans.
The 400 top earners in this country make as much money as the whole bottom 60%, and that's black, white, and Hispanic.
So that's where
it's a huge disparity, and there's great unfairness, and the folks on Capitol Hill
I think you're minimizing the gap between blacks and whites on this. I think you're minimizing it.
The gaps are everywhere in our society.
Here's your question, November 12th, 15 months from now, will African-American voters be as energized as they were in 2008 to vote for Obama?
McCain got the same share of the black vote as David Duke did in Louisiana, 4%. Obama will get 90% of the African-American vote, but it will not be as energized. It will not come out in the numbers and enthusiasm that it did.
Not as energized, but they'll be energized enough, because what will happen over the next year, a lot of them will take personally.
They won't be energized. They'll stay home. What about you?
Well, I think they'll vote, perhaps not in the same numbers as they did the first time around.
Over
for Barack
90%?
Obama. I don't think it'll be 90%, but he'll get. I think he won't get the same kind of percentage of support, but it'll be very close.
I think it'll be over 90%, but the turnout won't be as great. Obama's unlikely ally here is the Republican field right now, depending on who gets nominated.
Issue 3, Norway's agony.
The combination of the bomb explosion here with the shooting at the youth camp of the Labour Party, the Young Labour Party, that makes this really a serious attack.
Norway last week was the scene of gruesome terror. A lone wolf terrorist carried out both a bombing and a shooting spree attack that killed 76 people. The perpetrator is Anders Behring Breivik, a Norwegian citizen. First, Oslo. Breivik detonated a bomb outside government buildings that killed 8 people. Breivik then traveled 25 miles to a summer camp organized by the ruling party of Norway, the Labour Party, and opened fire. 68 people were killed at the island summer camp, bringing the total of Norway's citizens murdered to 76, mostly, of course, children. A 1,500-page manifesto written by Breivik was published online shortly before the attack. Breivik blasted the ruling Labour Party for allowing Muslims to immigrate to Norway.
Question, is Anders Breivik Norway's Timothy McVeigh or Norway's Jared Lochner? I ask you, Clarence.
McVeigh, I say. Really, unlike Lochner, Breivik had a philosophy. He plagiarized part of his manifesto from the Unabomber. He used McVeigh's methods. He views himself as part of this larger movement, and it's a race-based sort of thing. And it's difficult for them to determine if he's legally insane or not. Lochner is kind of obviously out of it, but this fellow is chillingly cogent when he's been questioned and all. So I'd say that would be a more appropriate comparison. But the real issue here is the larger issues of the multiculturalism debate, immigration, etc., that's been tearing European politics apart.
What about our immigration policy and whether it conceivably feeds into an endangerment of the population if it is regarded as and is existentially too lax? Are we, you know about multiculturalism now being attacked, particularly in Great Britain and elsewhere. Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's a huge issue in Europe. Frankly, Muslim immigration is a huge issue in Europe, in France, and it's been that way. When I was a student in France, it was a huge issue back then. It's a huge issue in Germany with the Turks. They have 3 million Turks who live in an isolated community. It's one of the reasons why Germany would never accept Turkey into the European Union. So it is a very, very critical issue to European politics.
This is a seminal moment for the right-wing parties throughout Europe, because they have really been exploiting fears about immigration, fears of their culture being submerged by all of the immigrants, and now they're really rushing to distance themselves from this fellow, and I think people are doing a same kind of self-examination we did after the shooting of Gabby Giffords. Is the kind of inflammatory rhetoric, is that appropriate in politics?
John, that was Jared Locke.
John, there has been an explosion of these right-wing populist parties. This guy got in contact with the True Finns, who just had a tremendous victory. A new party has just come up in Sweden. But it's all over Europe, John, to the point where, however, Merkel herself has condemned multiculturalism as a failure. Sarkozy echoed her. Cameron did. This is a gigantic issue. He's trying to ignite a civil war, though, in Europe between old Europe and new Europe. Huh?
They don't do multiculturalism right, by the way. When they talk about it, they're talking more of a Bantustan kind of situation where they say, well, you live over there, we'll live over here and not bother each other.
But these folks
That's not the way to do it.
assimilating is one of the problems.
Exactly.
Do you think our immigration
Assimilating
policy is based on public consensus?
No, it's not. The Americans have opposed immigration ever since the Immigration Act of 1965.
Who's right, the politicians
or the elites?
Who do the enactment or the public?
The public is right, and the elites are pushing the immigration down their throats.
Well, I think probably just about everybody on this set is the product of an immigrant class at one point.
Well, how far back?
My parents came from an island in Europe. I'm first
What's
generation.
The name of the island? It starts with an R.
The island of Fur.
Fur.
With an umlaut over the O in the north. But and it's reminiscent of this little Scandinavian country, Oslo. I was just in Oslo. The cops are not armed. It's the sleepiest, quietest place. You wouldn't think that this kind of horror could happen.
Iowa straw poll, August the 12th. Who wins?
Ron Paul.
Michelle Bachmann.
Rick Perry.
I'm going to stick with Michelle Bachmann.
Michelle Bachmann, bye-bye.
Geico, committed to providing service to its auto insurance customers for over 70 years. More information on auto insurance at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO, any time of the day or night.
How does an investment manager stand the test of time? By taking the long view through all market cycles and keeping a close eye on risk. Franklin Templeton Investments, a solid approach to investing for over 60 years. Gain from our perspective.
If, for such a small word, it packs a wallop. If I live to 100, if Social Security isn't enough, if my heart gets broken, if she says yes. We believe IF should never hold you back. IF should be managed with a plan that builds on what you already have. Together, we can create a personal safety net, a launching pad for all those brilliant ifs in the middle of life. You can call on our expertise and get guarantees for the if in life. After all, we're MetLife.